Matthew chapter 27 today. We're going to be taking a look at an extended passage there. Just going to be looking at one aspect. I want to be pretty targeted today. I mentioned earlier that today is Passover. Jesus, as the Lamb of God, has given his life for us. He's hanging on the cross. 2,000 years. You can go, there's a window of time somewhere beginning in about 3 years, 28, about 33, 6 years is the time frame that we know the crucifixion had to occur in those time periods, based upon Pilate being governor, based upon Caiaphas being high priest, and based upon, Herod being king in Galilee. And so all these, but we don't know exactly precisely what year. The Passover, the cross, we tend to think about the glory of the resurrection, I think, more than the glory of the cross. And yet these are two bookend events that are inseparable in a sense. And both have equal measures of glory. And I want to take a look today at the glory of the cross. And I want to look through a very specific lens. And I want us to see, in Matthew's gospel in particular, Matthew is bringing out this thought that this is a coronation of Jesus as king. And so this is a very strange thought. I was looking at, and I was reading the gospel accounts of his crucifixion. I was reading through Matthew. It occurred to me, and I'd never quite seen it in this way. So I'm excited to share some thoughts with you. But I began to realize that Matthew is seeing this as a coronation. And I thought, no, this is the most unusual coronation that you can imagine. An upside down coronation. For an upside-down kingdom in many ways. We've been conditioned to see reality through the kingdoms of this world. And when I think of coronations, and it wasn't a coronation, but being a child of the 20th century, Prince Charles and Diana's wedding. You remember that? Most of us probably remember that. The pomp of that, the ceremony of that, the splendor of that. I mean, just the amount of money and the amount of attention. So it's that kind of ceremony that I think of when I think of a coronation fitting of King Jesus. And yet when I read Matthew, I'm like, oh, this is unusual. So I want to read that passage, an extended passage, beginning in Matthew 27, verse 11, and I want to look at it through this lens. Beginning in verse 11, and I'm going to read through verse 61. So when I say extended, this is extended. So beginning in verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, Pilate, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says to him, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him. And she said, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, Which of these two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." "Let him be crucified." And they all said, They said, "Barabbas." And Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" And they all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and he washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself." And all the people answered, "His blood be upon us and our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. It says, "Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head. And they put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they spit upon him, and they took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put on his own clothes on him, and they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled him to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads, saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests and the scribes and the elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel? Well, let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God? Well, let God deliver him now if he so desires him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land. That's noon. Until the 9th hour, 3 p.m. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "This man is calling Elijah." And one of them ran at once and took a sponge and filled it with sour wine. And he put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the other said, Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and he yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe, and they said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." There were also many women there, looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. And he went to Pilate and he asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him, and Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and he laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting opposite the tomb. That's where Passover leaves us. It's late in the day, sun is setting. All over Jerusalem, people are gathering together and beginning the Passover meal. But Mary Magdalene, and it says, Matthew uses the term, the other Mary. I believe he's speaking about Mary, the mother of Jesus. They're just sitting there, numb. Unspeakable pain, anguish, as they consider Jesus lying inside of that tomb. And they're separated by that stone wall that has been rolled between them and Jesus, his body. The confusion, the bewilderment, how is this so? How could this be? They knew he was the Christ, but how could this be? How could this be? Well, I want us to, again, go back and reflect upon that day from the lens of Jesus as King. Now, it's interesting because in Matthew 26, just the chapter prior, just a few verses prior to where we began reading, in verse 63, as he stands before the high priest, and it says that Jesus in that trial remained silent, verse 63. And the high priest, Caiaphas, said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, you have said so. And that's an idiom, and you see that same response to Pilate. And by idiom, it's a saying that means more than the words. So when you translate it directly, but really what Jesus is saying is, yes, it is as you say. Yes, it is as you say. And so he tells them, he says, yes, you have said so. But, he says, I tell you that from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds of heaven. It says, then the high priest tore his robes and he said, he has uttered blasphemy. What further witness do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? And it says that they all answered, he deserves death. So what is the charge against Jesus here? It's blasphemy. He has called himself the Son of God. He has described himself as coming on the clouds of heaven. Only God rides the clouds. And if you read the Old Testament, God is the cloud rider. Jesus is describing himself as seated at the right hand of power, at the right hand of the Father, and he's coming on the clouds of heaven. So the charge is blasphemy. He deserves death. He has to be put to death. But they don't have the power, the authority to execute anyone. Only the Roman governor does, Pilate. So they go to Pilate, and notice where we began in verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asks him a question. Are you the king of the Jews? You notice it's not, are you a blasphemer? It's, are you the king? The charge has changed. They want to kill him because he's a blasphemer. But that holds no weight in a Roman court, because blasphemy, don't crucify for that. But a king, declare yourself a king, and that's a threat to Caesar. And all kings opposed to Caesar have to be put to death. And so Pilate is putting that question to him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus again responds, yes, it is as you have said. I am. In John, Jesus goes on to say that my kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, my disciples would fight. They'd take up the sword, they would fight. But my kingdom is not of this world, so they don't. That diffuses the situation. You can see how Pilate responds from that point forward. He's not, okay, doesn't sound like this guy's a threat. And so the trial goes on, but I want you to know that the charge was he is the king of the Jews. So it continues in verse 27 that after Pilate realizes that a riot is breaking out, he needs to pacify the crowd, keep peace. So he has Jesus scourged. And it says in verse 27 that the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they make a decision to have a bit of fun, a bit of evil fun, a bit of sport with this fellow. So one of them has this thought. King of the Jews, is he? I remember there's a scarlet robe. Where was that? In that cupboard just in the other room. Somebody go run get that scarlet robe. The color of kings. They come and they put that upon Jesus, right? Someone else has a thought, an inspiration comes to mind, just out of somewhere, you know. You know what? I saw there, just outside the praetorium here, there's a thorn bush. Go grab let's cut some thorns and let's make fashion a crown. They put that on Jesus. Someone else says, there's a stick over there, a reed. That'll be the scepter. And they're having a bit of sport with him, right? And they bow before him and hail King of the Jews. Hail King of the Jews, kneeling before him. All mocking. All making fun of him. It's a pretend coronation. But is it pretend? In their eyes it is. But what about the eyes of heaven? It's an interesting question. I want to delve into that a little bit. It says in verse 37, after they've crucified him, it says that over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Now there's quite a little tug of war here with Pilate and the chief priest over what the wording of that is going to say. And we actually read that in John chapter 19. And so Pilate, he says, let that read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." But it says that in John chapter 19, verse 21, so the chief priest of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write that. No, do not write that. Don't write the King of the Jews, but rather that this man said, 'I am a King of the Jews.'" And what Pilate answers, he responds this, "What I have written, and I will not change my mind." I'm not going back on that. I'm not giving ground. And it's interesting because where did this thought come from? That Pilate would write that inscription and put that over Jesus' head. It says that back in Matthew 27, it tells us who was at the cross. And we read that there was a large number of women that are there. But he gives us three. And it's interesting, those three. Mary Magdalene. And so this is verse 55. There were also many women there looking on from a distance who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Now, this is just interesting, but Mary Magdalene, but who's the Mary, the mother of James and Joseph? I'm intrigued by this, and I don't know exactly the reason why, but that's Mary, the mother of Jesus. So we know the names of the four brothers of Jesus, and James and Joseph Jr. are two of them. He's describing Mary, but he's not calling her the mother of Jesus. And I think, if I had to guess, I think he wants his readers' eyes fixed upon, this is the Son of God, and God is his Father. And I don't know. I don't want to dwell on that thought very long, but there's another woman that's here that's called out. And it's only here that Mary, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, is called out. And again, I'm intrigued by that. Why is she mentioned when in Mark, Luke, and John, she's not? What's the significance of why she's there? There's many other women that could have been called out. As they are. Sorry about that. So what is the significance of that? Well, actually, Matthew is telling us. He's got a connection here. Go back with me to Matthew chapter 20. In verse 20, weeks before the cross, it says, "Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee," that would be James and John, the disciples of Jesus. She comes to Jesus with her two sons. The other Gospels bring this out. Matthew's the one that brings out, but she is the one that makes the request. And it says that kneeling before him, Jesus, she asked a favor of him. And he asked her, "What do you want?" And she said to him, "Declare that these two sons of mine will sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." It's a pretty clear ask, what she's asking. She's saying, when you come into your kingdom, into your throne, when you are coronated as King of the Jews, as the Messiah, as the Christ, when that takes place, I'm asking you that my two sons would have positions of honor, one on your right and one on your left. That's the ask. It's a pretty clear ask. What Jesus says next is rather shocking, because it's like, Jesus, where are you going with this? She's asking for positions of glory at your coronation. And what Jesus says next is, look at this. 22. He says, "You do not know what you're asking." He's answering to the three of them. He says, "You have no clue as to what you're asking for." And he says, "Are you able to drink the cup that I am able to drink?" You know what that cup he's referring to? It's the cross. What does the cross and the coronation have anything to do with one another? In their minds, nothing. You couldn't have two events farther apart from one another. That's always been my understanding as well. So what is that connection? Why is Jesus bringing up the cross when she's asking for positions of honor? So it's interesting. He continues, Jesus does. He says, "You will drink my cup." Their response to that, by the way, is, "We're able. We're ready." It's like, yes, of course. And Jesus, again, you don't know what you're asking for. He says, "You will drink my cup." But he says, "But to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those whom it has been prepared by my Father." So those positions are those that have been given to others. Now, I've read this passage, and I always thought, I wonder who it is prepared for. Maybe Moses, maybe Abraham, maybe David, maybe Elijah, maybe, I've got all kinds of names, that would be worthy of that honor of being on the left and the right. But Jesus is speaking of the cross. And in his coronation, do you know who is on his right and on his left? Matthew tells us, we read it earlier. Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. Jesus says, you have no idea what you're asking for. You think you're asking for glory and honor, and don't you understand? The Son of Man has to be crucified. He will be coronated. But those on his left and his right, this is fascinating to me. This thought, this statement, that has been prepared by my Father. And it occurs to me as I look at this passage that the Father has been doing a great deal of preparation for that day. The charges that will be brought to Pilate, this man is the King of the Jews. If you go a little bit further, when they're brought into the praetorium, somebody comes up with that idea to go get a scarlet robe. Where did that idea come from? Prepared by the Father. Somebody's going to go get a crown. Where did that idea come from? The reed. Where did that come from? The Father's providing. He's orchestrating, if you would. There's a provision that's going on here. The statement above Jesus' head. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. So the cross, the Father has made preparation for this entire event, this earthly coronation of his Son as the King of Kings. It's the strangest coronation ever, to be sure. When I look at this, I want us to consider those 2 thieves for a moment. One crucified at Jesus' right and one at the left. The mother of James and John had asked that her sons be in that place. And Jesus says, no, they've been prepared for others. Why them? Why them? Well, in Luke chapter 23, verses 39, it says that one of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." And the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since we are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, and then this thief, this robber said to him, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Truly, truly, truly, that is, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." An amazing gift of grace. I think about the honor of that moment. The right and the left, right? And I think of Moses and Abraham and a nameless thief. God prepared beforehand. That in that moment, the Spirit of God moved upon that man. He reached out. His heart was stirred. He asked for grace, and grace was given. An incredible honor that was bestowed upon him. And I just think about, this is the way of God's grace. Who among us is deserving of the least of his favor? And then this is the point of it, is that this man has been prepared by the Father for this moment. And he, a thief, crucified, rightly so, by his own admission, is given the honor of being beside Jesus in his coronation. Consider for a moment, Simon of Cyrene. He's coming into Jerusalem with his family to celebrate the Passover. And I can imagine the crowds and the bustle and running behind, maybe stressed, and there's so much preparation that needs to take place. And here we're running behind schedule. And then Jesus meets them, coming with the cross, going in opposite directions. We know actually the two sons of Simon of Cyrene, Rufus and Alexander. Paul addresses them, Rufus, in Rome, and he addresses the wife of Simon of Cyrene. And Paul says, who is my mother as well. I think about the grace of that moment, prepared beforehand by the Father. They weren't an hour ahead. They weren't an hour behind. They were right here in this moment. And Simon of Cyrene, certainly when that soldiers looked at him, said, you, carry his cross. Simon of Cyrene, why me? Why me? Why not him? Why not, divine grace. Rufus and Alexander, two young boys there, looking upon Jesus. Jesus looks at them. And they see something in Jesus' eyes, love. Their hearts are moved. Their hearts are moved. And they're forever changed. I think about some of those soldiers that are in the praetorium. How do you know? How do we know what was said, what occurred inside of there? It's inside closed doors, just Roman soldiers. Do you understand that some of them came to faith? I think about the one that fashioned the crown of thorns, mocking. And as he comes to Jesus to put it on his head, envision Jesus lowering his head, offering it to him. And as he meets eyes with Jesus, instead of hatred and anger, he sees love. Something is moved and stirred inside of him. Grace. Grace upon grace. It continues. Those who are at the cross, George, you're on the crucifixion crew. Go see to it that it's done. Why me? Why me? Why not Bob? Why not, right? There was a divine appointment. The Father had prepared beforehand that this man pound the nails, looks at Jesus. Instead of anger, instead of hate, he sees love, and the heart is moved. I'm amazed at the grace of God. And this is the wonder of it. This encounter with Jesus, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. This is coronation. Truly, he is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I want to remind us that you and I are here because of an encounter with the living God, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the resurrected Jesus Christ. And it was not an accident that you met Jesus. You were drawn. And I thank God for his grace. And that's where I want to leave us today. The wonder of God's grace, the magnificent nature of it that we, so undeserving, have been drawn. Oh, Father, the wonder of that moment. Where I once only saw shame and death, you saw the cross in a whole different aspect, a whole other reality. I thank you for the grace of that encounter. And the overflow of it that has spilled out into our lives, that we too have encountered this one who is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I thank you for the gift of his life. And I thank you for the power of his resurrection. Because his life and his resurrection are ours. Not because we are worthy, but because he is worthy. I give you praise and honor for all glory, for all time. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.